Welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch and my guest is Dan Flynn, the Victorian State Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, welcome back.
It's a pleasure, Gavin. Great to be here.
We had a great time last week, and
thanks for having me back, Gavin.
Okay, just wanting maybe to pick up some elements there for our viewers who might be just tuned in for the first time.
Sure.
We had a boating experience with a catamaran capsizing, and a rescue boat came along, and we applied that to an issue article in The Age of a woman demanding an abortion. Now, how many weeks was that?
26 weeks. So her unborn baby is 26 weeks old. She's 41, and she's wanting termination for that perfectly healthy unborn baby.
So we had a committee meet from the hospital. The title of that committee?
The Termination Review Panel.
Okay, and they sided with her or against her?
Look, they actually decided that it would be inappropriate to perform an abortion at that stage of gestation. And so they advised her they would give her psychological support, they would give her a social worker, and she was also counselled about the option of adoption.
Okay, so there were many who came alongside to help her?
Absolutely.
Okay, and one of the things that came out of that, was it not that it was going to be hard to find a doctor to perform this late abortion?
Absolutely, Gavin, and this is something that's a bit of an expose of what's really happened inside that hospital in relation to this particular decision. And the young mother has made it public that she was told that they couldn't find doctors who would do this at their hospital, that the doctors found such a procedure to be very unpleasant.
Unpleasant in what way?
Well, it's a fully formed baby. She was also advised that she may have to observe such an abortion on an ultrasound screen, and that she would observe the baby's heart being injected with poison. So that would be not only distressing for her, but very distressing for the doctor and obviously midwives and support staff who would have to help out with the procedure.
Well, distressing for the child. I believe there's a UN convention about torture, bringing suffering to anyone.
Look, you're absolutely right to bring that up, because there's no doubt in the Royal Women's Hospital they'd be delivering healthy babies at less than 26 weeks who are brought on prematurely for whatever reason, and at least 23 weeks many of these children survive and live perfectly healthy lives. So we're talking about a viable infant. The reference to torture, as uncomfortable as that is, Gavin, is not out of place here, because we are dealing with an unborn baby who would clearly feel pain as a result of this, and the science of fetal pain indicates that certainly post 24 weeks a baby feels pain.
So we don't give this to be born baby an anaesthetic?
No, in the case of an abortion. However, where there are operations in utero in the same hospital, might be heart surgery or something else on this unborn child, yes, they would definitely administer anaesthetic. So it's if the child is wanted, a whole set of structures and procedures apply. If the child is not wanted, all those procedures are out the window, and we're no longer talking about a child, we're talking about the product of abortion and other such euphemisms.
Interesting. Wow, that's pretty sad. Another thing that came out of this review panel is that, well, for a fee, maybe the child could be aborted?
Yes, that was information that was said by this mother to be provided to her by the hospital, probably not by the review panel itself. She has indicated that for $7,500 she could attend a clinic in Melbourne and have an abortion, but the doctor would probably have to come in from overseas.
Well, there's an interesting thing for the unions and the Labor Party to pick up on. We'd have to bring a doctor in from overseas, not qualified through our medical training, to perform it for a fee.
Look, I think it probably shows, those of us who are at home watching this, just how concerned the medical practitioners are about the reality of abortion. That those who see unborn infants, those who deliver them, those who deliver live births are very concerned about the taking of a life in these circumstances.
Okay, well then that moves us to doctors who might have to stand before some review panel themselves and be told that maybe they'll lose their licence to practice. What's happening there?
Well, we know of an instance of a Dr. Mark Hobart, a North Sunshine doctor. He has a clinic that is looks like something off the Castle movie. It's a frontline doctor's surgery. He was approached in that surgery for a late-term abortion, which he thought was completely out of order because the request was that the unborn baby be killed, be removed from the mother's womb because it was a girl. He then referred that, or refused to refer, I should say, Gavin, indicating he wouldn't be involved. He reported the doctor that ultimately did that abortion, but found himself investigated for the failure to refer to somebody who would do the abortion. So it all came back on him, and it was a very adverse outcome for that conscientious doctor. The mother involved appreciated his love and care. She has returned to him for her subsequent pregnancy. So this is a man who's a really good general practitioner.
Okay, so we didn't hear of any women standing up for this child who was female and that female child's rights.
Correct. And, so if this is a women's rights issue, if abortion is a women's rights issue, you have to ask who is standing up for that young girl. And the answer is nobody except the pro-life movement. But this is violence against women, and women's groups really should stand up for this.
Well, thank you for that information. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Dan Flynn, the Victorian State Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, we're certainly focusing on some activity in our Victorian Parliament, and we've covered a number of topics. I used to think that youth in Asia was a reference to youth in Asia. It took me years to know that it carried other meanings.
Yes.
So what's happening with the Victorian Parliament and euthanasia in its most horrific form?
Gavin, at the start of this year there was a motion by the Greens to refer the question of euthanasia for those who had terminal illnesses to an external body outside of the Parliament called the Law Reform Commission. There was a strong uprising by Victorian voters that said no, this should be dealt with by the Parliament. The concern was that if it went off to the Law Reform Commission, it would come back with their imprimatur, and that would shift momentum towards the legalisation of euthanasia. Where we're up to now, Gavin, is that the question of end-of-life choices, so broader than just euthanasia, is now with the Legal and Social Affairs Committee, where they're conducting public hearings.
Well, I'm sort of in that vintage, that prehistoric 68 years of age, had cancer, have kidney disease. I'm really quite a candidate, aren't I?
Gavin, you're way too young, way too youthful with far too much contribution to make. And I think this is part of the point here, that people can go through very difficult and even life-defining crises in their life, but they are of value to their family, they are of value to the community. And I think we demean people if we suggest that an early option, an early way out is doctor-assisted suicide. That is just simply unacceptable because we will all enter a stage of life where we become very dependent on other people. We don't have the skills that we have now. We want to be assured that our life will be valued, and that we, when we can't make an economic contribution, will be dispatched. That's just not the sort of humanity that we wish to be a part of. That's not the community that we've formed.
Yes. Well, I would like to see more than 9 grandchildren that I have.
Well, there we go. And when it is our time to depart this earth, we don't want to deprive our children and our grandchildren of sharing that important time with them. And it's all part of the cycle of life. And but it's wrong of us to intervene and to clinically end life in the name of autonomy. There are higher values than autonomy, and the preservation of human life and the protection of the vulnerable are certainly more important values.
We certainly do place value on a child that's in the womb that might have the need of an operation of some kind on the heart, and as you said, all stops are pulled out to make sure that life is preserved.
Yes.
And yet there can be a subtle change of thought, and we can remove all help.
It's an interesting one, Gavin. Some people will say, look, there's no need to legalise euthanasia, it's happening already. But that is not the case, and a closer understanding realises that, look, when a doctor takes a step deliberately intending to end a patient's life, that is euthanasia. But often where medication, morphine is provided to relieve pain in the final stages of life, that will have the secondary effect of hastening death, but it's not the intention of the doctor. And so good palliative care is very different to euthanasia, and we need to be able to make those distinctions. So it's good for our listeners to do a bit of homework on that, to research that, and work out what euthanasia is and what it isn't.
Okay, I think that's a good point that we make for our listeners to consider and do their research.
Yes.
Because we are dealing with words, and words have meaning.
Yes.
And we need to keep to the meanings to keep our understanding unclouded.
Yes.
All right, so here you are, a grandparent for the first time, a couple of months into that, so what's happening?
I'm a new grandparent, and my wife is enjoying being a grandmother for the first time. She's terribly young to be enjoying that experience, but I'm glad that she is. So our family are busy and being productive, and all trying to contribute in some good Christian way to the future.
Good. And your daughter-in-law is enjoying this too?
Absolutely, yes. And so she's got a business role as well, which is mixing with motherhood. And I think it's it's a great part of the way that families can adapt, is that there can be a little bit of work for her, a little bit of child minding from the grandparents, and that we all work together. It's great to see the family functioning in that way.
Well, there's a holistic model. It's looking at everything that contributes to life.
Yes.
From work and raising a child and supporting that child.
Yes.
What about the holistic way that we don't help young women or older women with an unexpected pregnancy? Why do we only give them some information?
It's because of a totalitarian worldview that plays out in politics, that suggests that if a woman wants an abortion, then that is the only option that should be considered, and that her decision to have an abortion is paramount. So, if the thumbs are up and the child is wanted, it's a baby. If the thumb's down, the child's not wanted, it's a clump of cells. So we don't offer counselling as we should. And, I think any move that would offer independent counselling with all the options to young women who are presenting for abortions would be a great move forward.
The ultrasound plays an important part here, doesn't it?
Look, absolutely. I think to see fingers, toes, facial expression on a young unborn baby makes a huge difference. And I think that's why the pro-life movement is getting younger and getting larger, because the brothers and sisters at the age of 4 and 5 are seeing this high definition ultrasound films, and people take this on board and realise it's clear what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with a political issue, we're dealing with a brother or a sister.
Well, thank you for that, Dan. You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Dan Flynn, the Victorian State Director of the Australian Christian Lobby. Dan, again, we've covered a lot of ground, and federally, we've spent a lot of time in Victoria. How about federally? What's happening? What's on the chit-chat, behind-the-scenes talk?
Well, Gavin, since we last spoke, there's been a significant leadership change in the federal parliament. Malcolm Turnbull is now Prime Minister, and that came all very rapidly on one particular Monday afternoon. And, by Tuesday morning, the world had changed in Australia. One of the issues of concern for the Australian Christian Lobby is maintaining the definition of marriage. And what we saw before this leadership change was that the party room met, the Liberal Party room, and decided that there would be a plebiscite on the question after the next election. And that was a resounding majority in the coalition, or in the Liberal Party coalition room. And I think of some 2/3 majority supported this. Now, the change of leadership hasn't affected that. In fact, Malcolm Turnbull, on his first day as Prime Minister in question time, affirmed that there would be a plebiscite after the election. So it's important that people are able to have a free discussion on this, a respectful discussion, that both the side of the argument that would prefer same-sex marriage and the side of the argument that would say marriage should be between a man and a woman should both be properly funded, and those who contend for the traditional view should not be called bigots or homophobes. The name-calling really must stop, so that people at home can enter into a discussion at their workplace among their friends without being silenced or accused of being bigoted for stating the view that they have held, that their parents and grandparents have held, that this can be freely discussed, and we can work out where the community sentiment ultimately exists.
People really play around with this word tolerance, don't they? Here we are wanting a sensible debate, and yet we're going to be called bigots, etc.
Well, look, the problem with the word tolerance is that it's used by people who really want their view only to get airtime. I think tolerance, should be a two-way street. We've seen a lack of this in the media, unfortunately, who have generally pushed the same-sex agenda and really marginalised both members of Parliament and citizens who have taken a different view. And so we're concerned about that. I think we've heard some good statements from Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister saying, look, we will have a respectful conversation about this. And so I think he's setting a good tone in relation to that. And we should all rise to the occasion, and including the media, who should give equal airtime to both arguments.
Yes. So let's move on to perhaps some bills that are coming up that might be an encouragement to the viewers.
There's a new bill that is groundbreaking on the life front in Victoria. There's been very little legislative movement in relation to the topic of abortion for probably 100 years. In 1969, there was a court case which was called the Menhennet ruling that said that abortion is permissible if the life of the mother is at risk. That very narrow definition was extended somewhat to mean if the health of the mother was at risk. So that's 1969. In 2008, there was the Abortion Law Reform Act. which permitted abortion up until the term, providing 2 doctors signed off on that post 24 weeks. There's a new bill that has been announced in Parliament. It had its first reading speech last week, and it's called the Infant Viability Bill. This bill will make abortion illegal after 20 weeks, except in the case of a medical emergency, and it will offer mandatory counselling or make the offer of counselling mandatory to women who present for an abortion, and that the test is that they are offered holistic care for whatever may be the drivers behind that abortion. So I think, Gavin, that people who are, many people who are pro-choice, who are even pro-abortion, feel a great discomfort about abortion post 20 weeks when there is clearly a viable person there. So I think that this bill will be successful in speaking to mainstream Australians about why we should stand up for people who are that developed that they could have a life outside the womb if they were delivered at that point.
It's the same sort of debate for or against euthanasia, the fact that there is life here and it's precious.
Yes.
And there is still so much potential and so much to give.
Yes, yes. And, sometimes in the pro-life movement we can be told, look, you're really pro-birth, you're not actually pro-life, which is a criticism that can be pitched. But you don't have any human rights if you can't get out of the womb alive. So that is the ultimate and most important human right, the right to be born. And we certainly stand up for that. And look, we're excited about this bill. The bill will be debated in the upper house of the Victorian Parliament, and we very much look forward to that. And we look forward to people being able to share their own stories about the reality of their own baby in the womb post 20 weeks.
Storytelling is a very powerful and important way to not just get a point across, but to talk about reality.
Absolutely.
What happens and what doesn't happen, and the holistic view is so important.
Yes. Gavin, one of the best stories comes from Melissa Oden, who was out here in Victoria in 2008. She presented, her mother presented for an abortion in 1978. It was a pretty straightforward attendance at a clinic that would solve that mother's problem. But Melissa survived that saline abortion and was discovered by a nurse in some medical waste. And Melissa has now lived to tell the tale and has come to Victoria to tell her story. So very compelling that Melissa has been in a position to share her story, and we realise that, look, there is life in the womb and it ought to be protected regardless of one's politics.
Thank you, Dan, so much.
That's my pleasure.
You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.